In the beginning there was just God, three in one, a perfect relationship of equals. God's nature was and is to love and to create. So God set the universe in motion. Matter, antimatter, light, sound, atoms and dust, heaven and earth, all the dimensions of existence, all that you can see and all that you can't see. So the earth became a place where life could exist, just the right conditions. First, life developed in the seas. And then on land. God said, "Let the land produce living creatures on the ground and in the air." God looked on it all and said that it was good. In time, human beings were created to be something like God, with an awareness of Him, an awareness of right and wrong, an ability to love and create, made to love God and be loved by Him. And human beings were to care for all of creation, to keep it in balance for the present and for the future, to reflect back God's love and care for all of creation into the world. God looked on the earth now and said, "It was very good." And for a time, humanity lived close to God, to each other, and to nature. Human beings have always been free to choose how they live. Real love will not force itself on anyone, and God is love. Free will is a good thing and can lead to wonderful creativity and expressions of love and life. But at the same time, it can lead to bad decisions. And many human beings over time have decided not to include God in their decision making, and the world has suffered. The result for thousands of years has been the exploitation of other people, created as equals by God, the exploitation of the planet, a lack of direction in individual lives and in communities. Human beings began to search anywhere and everywhere for satisfaction and purpose in life. We filled that God-shaped space with other things until we pushed Him out of the picture. But those short-term and passing fixes never satisfy. We treated others and the planet with little respect. We lost sight of what was really important, how it all started and how things were meant to be. But God never stopped loving the world and the humans that He made in His own image. And for tens of thousands of years, He's been patiently calling us back to Him, patiently working towards recreating this troubled world and restoring His relationship with human beings. He promised he would one day in the future bring in a new age, a new heaven and a new earth, a new creation. The prophets in the Old Testament tell us of an age to come when the lion will lie down with the lamb, where there will be peace and harmony, where there will be no more tears or suffering. But God continued to choose to work through human beings, and he chose the Hebrew race, ancient Israel, the heirs of Abraham, to be the people through whom he would work to put the whole world to rights. They were called by him to be a blessing for the whole world. He gave them a law and made a covenant with them. He led them out of slavery in Egypt. He made a mutual promise that they were to be his people for the good of the whole world. In return, he would never leave them and always provide what they needed. But just like humans of all ages, they turned from God to their own ways and started worshipping other things, idols made of precious metals, money, sex, power. These became the most important thing in people's lives. But God never gave up on the human race. And 2,000 years ago, he entered into the world himself as a human being, born as a Jew in Palestine. That first Christmas, he was called Jesus. He and he alone was able to live a life in perfect relationship with God the Father. He announced that all the hopes, all the promises and expectations of the Jewish nation were coming true in him. He announced that God's reign, his rule, his revolution for everyone was coming into the world through him. His life backed up his words, and he exploded onto the scene with acts which demonstrated what God's new world of the future would be like, a new world which could be experienced in part right here and right now. He healed the sick. He spent most of his time with people that respectable people went nowhere near. The criminals, the prostitutes, the poor and the needy. He spoke all about freedom and liberation, about the love of God for all people. He told us to think of God as a perfect Father in heaven. So in what he said and in what he did, he showed that God is just and fair. He's on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized. He was living proof of that Old Testament picture of the lion lying down with the lamb, of a new world, of a new way of being human. He challenged human-made rules. He criticized the religious leaders of his day. He said they'd forgotten what they were there for, who God had called them to be. He announced and lived out God's upside-down revolution in the world, and he called it God's kingdom, God's rule. This was a revolution where real life is about loving and serving, not about money or power or status, about loving God, being loved by God, and being the people who would bring that love and that justice and peace into the world. But Jesus' message wasn't popular, particularly with those who were in positions of authority, because he was challenging them. He was arrested, he was tortured and executed, and it seemed that self-interest and evil itself had won the day. It looked like Jesus and all he stood for had been defeated. Nailed to a wooden cross, left to die slowly, Jesus felt what it was like to be separated from God the Father for the first time. And just before he died, he cried out, "It is done." But far from being a defeat, Jesus' death achieved so much. He absorbed all that evil could throw at him, And by giving himself totally, he overcame evil with good. He bridged the gap between human beings and a perfect and loving God. 3 days later, this was fully proved, fully vindicated when he rose again from the dead. Not a ghost, not resuscitated, but with a new eternal body, somehow the same, but somehow different to before. Resurrection marked the beginning of a new creation. Evil and death, the great enemies, had been overcome, and the world would never be the same again. God's revolution had begun in earnest. And Jesus' earliest followers were to continue Jesus' mission, to continue this revolution of love in the world. Signs of this new coming world, a world where there will be no more pain or tears or hatred or exploitation, a world where all that is evil, where death itself, is gone for good. This is Jesus' invitation to the whole world today, to turn away from our own way of doing things, to look to God, who is behind all creation, to join in with him as he revolutionizes the way the world is, and ultimately to go through death with him and out the other side into a new life. The promise of God is that one day he will make all things new. There will be a new creation where all that is wrong is put right. And so we are invited to join in this story, to find our place, to play our role as this future world begins to break in to the present. Will we choose to do all we can to work with God as he makes all things new?
And this is Jesus' invitation to all of us today, to turn away from our own way of doing things, to turn away from destroying the environment, turn away from inequality and exploitation of the poor, to look to the God who is behind all creation, to join with him as he revolutionizes the way the world is, and ultimately to go through death with him and out the other side into an even fuller and richer life. So Jesus' invitation then is to follow him, to overcome evil with good, to play our part in God's big story right here and right now. And it's a story that we'll always be part of. It's a story which invites us to see a bigger world, an extended view of reality. We don't need to be convinced of every part of it. We just need to try it on for size. Start living the story and see where it takes us. So God invites us all to find our place in this one big story, to live it practically now and forever, to invite others too to live in this story, the only story which can really make sense of our lives and of the way we know the world to be, the only story where we can find a lasting hope.